Hi, my name is Dora, and I'm a senior at BU studying international relations and Jewish studies. And I'm excited to introduce Audrey Sasson, the Executive Director of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and the organization's first Mizrahi leader to serve in the position with over 30 years of experience. We also have Joanna Ware, the founding executive director of the Jewish Liberation Fund, who has spent over 15 years working with organizations inside and outside of the Jewish world. And finally, our discussant is Rabbi Becky Silverstein, a community rabbi based in Jamaica Plain who co-founded the Trans Halacha Project and organizes Jewish philanthropy. Welcome.
Thank you, Dora. As you may have noticed, there's no one standing at the podium right now. We're going to shift it up a little bit and have some discussion amongst the three of us, and then we'll open it up for questions to everyone else in the room. Sound like an okay plan to people? Yeah? Okay, great. Perfect. And the first question we're going to start with is, who are you? What does your organization do? And what role do you play in the broader ecosystem of the Jewish left?
Should I start, or where do you want it?
You start.
I'm going to
Go
start.
ahead,
Okay, I'm going to start.
Yeah, you start.
First of all, it's such a joy, in a weird way, to be here today. I'm feeling really energized and really grateful to the organizers of today. I think we've all needed a bit of an energy shift, and today has felt fortifying, even in its heartbreak. And so thank you to everyone who's come together today. So I am the Executive Director of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. We have any members in the house? Raise your hand. Love to see it. We are the home of the Jewish left in New York. We were established in 1990, which actually I am connecting some dots here, which is when Yusuf named sort of maybe the beginning of the end of the international world liberal order, and I think that's not a coincidence in some ways in terms of the work that JFREJ has been doing for the last 35 years. And at the time, our co-founders and our founding members were being agitated by other sort of organizers in the wider New York City ecosystem to fill a really critical gap. Where if the Jewish left wasn't organized in New York City, the Jewish right was certainly going to be swooping in and taking dominance. We know that it obviously has been doing that, but it was an intervention that was actually called in from our allies and our partners. Jews were active in many, many organizations across the city, but not as Jews. And it was decided that that was a necessary intervention, and so we began. If anyone wants to ask me about our founding story, I'll be more than happy to share it. But yeah, so we are filling a strategic gap in New York City, and we have been building the Jewish left for 35 years. We organize Jewish New Yorkers alongside our neighbors and our allies for a New York where all communities have the freedom to thrive. It's very simple in a way. But it's very necessary that we do that in a city with the largest number of Jews outside of Israel, and really the largest number of Jews, period, in any city in the world. So right now we have 6,000 dues-paying members. Dues are an important part of how we organize. Yeah, we have some, yeah. But we are also, we reach at least 30,000 people, sort of more widely in terms of supporters of our work, who follow our work, and tens of thousands more nationally and internationally. We're powered by our members every day, hundreds of whom are taking action literally daily. I kid you not, every single day we have some of our leaders leading actions, doing political education, organizing people in small groups, organizing people in large groups, honing our analysis, and building relationships both with each other and with our coalition partners across the city. I would say that, and what we are building from that is we're showing up as a, joyful, defiant, and definitively Jewish force in the wider New York ecosystem fighting for a just future for all. We organize to fight anti-Semitism and bad faith accusations of anti-Semitism, and we've been organizing since October 2023 for a ceasefire in Gaza. and in the horrific, devastating, and unspeakable months since then for an arms embargo and an end to genocide in Gaza. That almost feels like the easy stuff in some ways after today, as we know. And today we're fortifying ourselves and mobilizing in the fight against the MAGA agenda and all of its hateful, cruel policies playing out in our backyard, from defending our immigrant neighbors and our trans family members to defeating Eric Adams, who can't seem to help himself from allying with a fascist and selling out New Yorkers for his own personal gain. We work on issues that affect all New Yorkers: housing, healthcare, police violence, worker justice, always in coalition with our organizations across the city, because for us, and we'll get into this more, the idea of collective liberation, Sarah Ann was saying, we haven't talked about liberation, but the idea of collective liberation at JFREJ is not a slogan. It is a daily embodied practice of solidarity rooted not in charity, not in wanting to be the good allies or the good Jews, just actual, real, authentic, shared interest in a shared future for all. So that's who we are.
Oh, what an honor to be on this stage with this comrade, both of these comrades. My name is Joanna Ware. I'm the founding executive director of the Jewish Liberation Fund, also often referred to as JLF. JLF is a community foundation. We are mobilizing resources through organizing donors and organizing money to grow and sustain a vibrant movement for justice and liberation for all of us. The Jewish social justice movement, the Jewish left, whatever we call it, those are our people, that's our movement, and we want our money to be powering our movement. The sort of origins of JLF, there are some people in this room who have been in this organizing from the beginning, but we're not actually that old. We're the baby on the stage in a lot of ways. But kind of at the root, for me at least, was a question that I found coming up over and over and over again as I worked in the Jewish social justice world and watched our movement grow, I would say throughout the 2010s. And the question was, how are we going to win if we're not organizing money? Truly, how are we going to win if we are not organizing money? Because I saw over and over and over again the ways in which organized money was winning, was defining the scope of what was possible for our organizations and our movements and our people. Because tragically, we continue to live under capitalism. And so we need to get paid, and we need to put roofs over our heads, and we have, right, like families to feed and clothe and all of those things. And the left largely was not at that moment in time organizing money. So JLF emerged from that question, and we pursue our work through a few different core strategies. The first of which is a participatory grant-making process that really is rooted in shifting power around how decisions are made and who makes decisions about how resources are allocated to our movement. So our participatory grant-making process centers the leadership of Black and Indigenous Jews, Jews of color, Sephardim, Mizrahim, movement leadership. So we have a steering committee that sets direction and strategy for the organization in partnership with staff, and we have a community grant-making team. And again, members of those bodies, current and former, are in this room. Deep gratitude for your wisdom and vision. They decide how resources are allocated. Then, in addition to that, we focus on organizing grassroots donors and philanthropy. We do political education, a number of other pieces in those buckets, but that's our primary work. Organizing people, organizing money in service of resourcing our movement.
Thank you. Thank you both for your work and for those descriptions. They were perfectly succinct. We've heard a bit today about building alternatives, right? Building the world that we want to be living in. And I know that both of your organizations are deeply involved in that work of creating those new avenues for engagement, however we might describe them. And so I want to know how you all would describe what the world that we're building looks like. How are you doing that building? And what does it feel like, too? And Audrey, you're going to start on this one.
I'm going to start, okay. I just started getting emotional because I was thinking about how everything we learned and talked about this morning makes it that much more urgent and imperative that we do win. Because what we are trying to build in New York, what we are trying to model and embody every single day, is that there is another way. There is another way for us to be in this world, for us to be in relationship, for us to thrive and to imagine joy and beauty and culture, and never to have to apologize for who we are as Jews, plenty of accountability for what our community and what Israel has been doing. But we as Jews do not have to apologize for being Jewish. We get to be fully ourselves. We do not have to succumb to the forces of assimilation. The world in which that we are fighting for is one where we are neither assimilated nor are we choosing the dominance of an ethno-state and the genocidal violence that we have seen over the last 15 months plus as we think about the long history of this project. So we are rooted. We've talked a little bit about it. We're going to talk more about the history of the Bund. The Bund was one example. It wasn't the only one. It's one of the most well-known examples of this idea of Jews struggling to imagine what it looks like to really build a future that is anti-fascist, that is fighting the forces together, fighting the forces of domination alongside other communities who are similarly targeted, that understand that as a dispersed community all over the world, our only hope is to throw our lot in with other diasporic communities and to be a united front against those forces of racial capitalism, of oligarchy, and of just dominance and hate that we are seeing playing out right now, and that we've been seeing that we've seen for centuries in different forms. And so we're rooted in this idea that the Jewish Labor Bund had famously put out, and that at one time was a real grappling of an idea. We're going to hear from Molly Crabapple later about the Bund, and I am very excited about that. We are inheritors of that legacy at JFREJ. I know other organizations in this room, BWC and others, also take their inspiration from the Bund, and for us, we kind of translated it into, or our first executive director, Melanie K. Kantrowitz, of blessed memory, talked about the work of JFREJ in the terms of what she called radical diasporism. So diasporism is a word that we've heard a lot about recently. I think people have been, it's sort of getting a resurgence right now, which is beautiful. I like to bring Melanie in as sort of a prominent, queer thinker and a leader in her time who insisted that crossing boundaries, boundary crossing, is what makes us most human. It what allows for the most possibility. The idea that we don't want to create boundaries, we want to cross boundaries. That is the only way into liberation for all of our people. And so JFREJ is really rooted in that. And the way that I summarize that vision is that we believe in a future where there is no justice just for Jews, and there's no justice that's going to erase us. And we can fight for a future where both of those things are simultaneously possible, but only if we do that in solidarity with every other targeted community and believe that there is, we have to fight for that way forward, and it's none of the models that we're seeing right now are offering that. Not in our community, in every community that's ever been attacked, that's ever been oppressed, always has a choice. We always have a choice between retreating in fear or reaching across. And every single day that we wake up at JFREJ, we choose the reach every single day. So that is what we are building.
I came into this work as an organizer, and I was trained in organizing through the Join for Justice community organizing fellowship. And I really struggled that first year to understand agitation. I was like, I'm not sure if I get it. What does it look like? What does it feel like? One of their criteria at the time for candidates was that we had edge. And I was like, I don't know, am I edgy enough? I don't know. I don't know if I have it. I don't know if I have the appetite for it. And I've come to more deeply understand agitation, but I bring that up because what was hard for me at the time to feel into was what it felt like for agitation to be grounded in deep love and in a deep belief in people's capacity for transformation. And that, I think, is at the heart of JLF's work, and it is at the heart of the culture we are trying to nourish. And part of that is by necessity. Part of it's by like aspiration and ethics and vision, and part of it's by necessity. Philanthropy, private philanthropy in particular, has no natural predators. I have no external means of accountability to compel any number of these major private Jewish foundations doing so much damage to our community to do any different. All we've got is shame. And personally, I don't believe that people move towards lasting transformation through shame. We turn away from shame. We shut it down. We do everything we can to pull the fangs out of it to make it go away. And so what that has meant is that we really need to lean into the idea of making it clear, making the vision clear, and inviting people in to experiment and practice and feel what it can feel like to choose a different path, right? To choose solidarity, to choose being in it with one another, power with, as opposed to power over. Philanthropy has so many incentives to just hold tight to power. Structural through the legal system that insulates and protects philanthropic institutions in this country, and through the ways in which so many of us, and I will, include myself, though I am not like an individual prominent philanthropist, but so many of us in the Jewish world, I think broadly in the United States, have internalized a story that says that our proximity to whiteness for some of us and our proximity or access to and control of wealth is what will protect us. That's what will keep us safe. That's the story we've heard. And there's evidence to say that it's true, right? There's evidence in my own family. I can tell that story. And we are testing a hypothesis of an alternative. So part of how we're doing that is through each one of our programs, right? It's through the practice of our participatory grant making, through the culture that we're trying to nourish that says like, we're inviting you to step with us into actually this really hard work. People often say to me like, oh, it must feel so good to give money away. Like, yes, there are moments when it feels amazing. There are also moments when it's absolutely heartbreaking. Just like, oh God, we had to decide who to say no to. Or if we don't say no, we have to accept that that means we're not giving enough to anyone. How do you make that call? Who in this room knows for sure what the answer is? We don't claim to. But what we are trying to do is build a practice together, build the muscles together of making those decisions together and expanding who gets to make those decisions, inviting more and ever more people to be in it with us. So we're practicing that through our participatory grant making, and then we're trying to invite people into that practice through our organizing, one means or another, right? To really feel, hey, this is what it can feel like. To not feel like as leftists, as anti-capitalists, we just have to lean away from money as though that's a path to power, or as though if we don't touch it, maybe we're more morally pure, and we'd rather sit in that place of moral purity than be in the muck. We're trying to say, hey, we can be in the muck together. And maybe that'll help it feel a little bit safer.
Thank you. Some of you know that JFREJ sells merchandise that says TERFs are trafe, that trans exclusionary radical feminists are trafe, somehow unkosher. And I just want to put a plug in for new JFREJ swag that says, there is no justice just for Jews and no justice that erases us. So I don't know who here needs, I need to tell Shifra, that's the, I just want to put that plug in, and then also maybe something that says agitation grounded in love. I'm envisioning a hoodie. Yeah, that will be my contribution to today's conversation. Before we turn it over to the audience, I want to ask one more question, which is, how has funding shaped what is possible on the Jewish left? Oof, it's a small one.
It's the biggest one.
Yeah. And Joe, I would love for you to start.
Okay. So I shared with you a little bit of JLF's origin story, right, which was in response to seeing the ways in which funding was narrowing what was possible. And specifically for me, what was initially the initial source of that agitation was realizing that because of funders and the existential threat that their disproportionate power posed for organizations, we were consistently not talking about Palestine. That was the first agitation for me. But that is far and away not the limit of it. But we have seen that play out, and I want to be really clear that the consequence of that, there are consequences there for Palestinians and for Israelis that are dire. And we are seeing every day the life and death stakes of those consequences. But the consequences of that is not limited to Palestinians or Israelis, right? The consequences of that have also reverberated across the Jewish social justice landscape in the ways in which we have been precluded from being in deep partnership with movement partners and allies who might land in a slightly different place, even than some of us do, and certainly than our funders do, on Palestine. It has meant that rather than digging into relationship and struggling with the complexities and the disagreement, organizations across the country were left in an impossible position. It has meant that we didn't have the kind of real robust relationships to hold dialogue about anti-Semitism when it emerged, because we hadn't put the work in. Because our funders said, well, pull your funding. If you talk to people who support BDS, if you talk to people who center Palestinian humanity in their politics, well, you know who wouldn't take our calls to say, like, hey, can we talk about this anti-Semitism that's showing up? The people that we weren't in relationship with. Specifically, I want to lift up that there are particular ways in which philanthropy, Jewish philanthropy over the last, well, since October 2023, have pivoted in ways that are doing real harm to our movement. And I think there's probably the obvious ones that come to mind, specifically around Israel-Palestine, but not every foundation, but by and large, institutional Jewish philanthropy since October 7th has shifted away from a commitment that they made very proudly and boldly patting themselves on the back to racial justice in 2020. They have contracted from racial justice funding. They have contracted from support for organizations led by Jews of color. They have contracted from the social justice field more broadly. And they have justified it, when they have even deigned to offer any justification, by saying they needed to prioritize support for Israel. They put in such stark frame this juxtaposition between even just like holding the humanity of Palestinians, right? Targeting JOC leaders and organizations that really the floor was acknowledging the humanity of Palestinians, and that held that up against the safety and well-being of the Jewish people, as though you couldn't possibly fathom investing in racial justice and that was part of a vision of safety and liberation for the Jewish people, right? It has been devastating to the field. And I'm seeing my dear beloved April here, whose voice has been reverberating, April Baskin, who's part of JLF's early leadership team, whose voice reverberates in my head, which is that, right, these foundations they're resetting to factory operating conditions. That's what we see happening, this retraction. And as a result, the leaders that we most need at the heart of our movement are being left unflanked, unprotected, and isolated. And literally without the means to, right, meet their basic needs.
Yeah. that. I want to shout out my co-panelists. And just to name and say, I think that the Jewish left is very, any strength that we have right now, we have to give it up for Jewish Liberation Fund, for the donor organizing, and all the ways in which Rabbi Becky Silverstein has been agitating and organizing donors and moving money in big ways and small, really all behind the scenes, and in some ways, it has been critical. It's been a critical intervention, and I will say, JLF is essentially the only institutional Jewish funder that JFREJ receives money from. I'm not getting that wrong, am I sure? I'm like, did I get that wrong? But essentially, that's the case, and that means everything. And it goes a long way, and the ways in which, I would say, one of the ways that JFREJ was able to show up after October 7th in our integrity was because we have a grassroots fundraising model, and that, 75 to 80% of our funding comes from individuals who are politically aligned with our work. And any foundation support that we get is obviously politically aligned as well, but we are we are able to be much more flexible as a result of that. And what that means is that, I've been really struck by how central the conversation is when we talk about the Jewish left. First of all, for years, we talk about JFREJ as the home of the Jewish left in New York, the home of the Jewish left more widely in a lot of ways, as and then sometimes in spaces with nonprofit, the nonprofit space, like wondering, do we use the word left? Are we talking about progressive? Like, what's going to land with people? What is the Jewish left? Like, what is that? And the truth is, I've from way before October 7th, I think we felt very clear that there is no Jewish left without a reckoning with Palestine. That can't happen. You can't build a Jewish left without reckoning with what is happening in Palestine. And so that has been, I think that has really shaped the ecosystem in a really, really real way, and it has also meant that JFREJ has had the flexibility, because our fundraising is so grassroots, to do that in an honest way, to do that in a complex way, but also to just do it, period. And we've often had people tell us from other parts of the country, working in other organizations that are Jewish and progressive, that they wish they could be so brave. They wish they could, say the right thing, et cetera, but they can't, right? For all the reasons that Joe just laid out. And that, to imagine the lives literally, the lives lost as a result of that recklessness, it's unconscionable. And we have to reckon with that, I think, and we have a long road ahead. I think we are going to be haunted by this for such a long time. I am proud that we've been able to organize with integrity at JFREJ, but I am so ashamed that it has felt so lonely. I want to shout out Boston Workers Circle here, who were among the early ceasefire proponents. Obviously, we need JVP, and if not now, and all the organizations working directly on these issues, on Israel-Palestine, to win. We need to win. And we need the organizations working domestically to also win in order to build the alternative. And we won't be able to do that with the litmus tests and the gatekeeping and the gaslighting that is happening in the philanthropic world, both within the Jewish world and beyond it. Because the truth is, if you think about some of the other secular, big secular funders, they're also in, they're aligned with this bigger project because they're afraid. They're afraid of this. I think the hegemonic. I think Yusuf said it so well that it's, it has felt like when you look at if you look at the New York Times or you look at big foundations that will not be named, but I will that think that they will be betraying the Jewish people and they will be deemed anti-Semitic if they don't review every single statement that came out from an organization's mouth in the wake of October 7th and pull funding from those said organizations, those working on racial justice and beyond. The left in the United States is struggling as a result of these practices and these policies. So I think that that's one of the ways in which it has shown up.
Thank you both. I think the thing I'll add to that is that not only has the question around Palestine and questions around anti-Semitism vis-a-vis funding limited who you all can be in relationship with, I think in a lot of the Jewish world, it has limited what work is happening on the Jewish left too, right? Where the content of work has focused on Jewish safety, on confronting anti-Semitism, on Israeli safety, all important things. And so JFREJ especially, right, in your ability to have grassroots organizing, right, and fundraising as well, have not only been able to call for a ceasefire, right, but also have been in some ways leading the work for trans liberation in the Jewish community in this moment, and you know, JLF lifting up the work for racial justice and equity too. And so we see, I think, demonstrated in both of these organizations, the way in which a freedom to address that which is most pressing, the genocide in Gaza, also provides space to address that which is really pressing here too, right? Which is the rise of authoritarianism and the attacks on any number of communities here. Okay, y'all, who's got a question? I see. I'm gonna look right, and we'll go one over here in the purple maroon shirt, and then we'll come back to center.
Hi, thank you so much for what you're doing and for bringing up the subject of money. Because we were talking before about why Democrats shied away from opposing some of the horrendous tactics that Israel is deploying in Gaza, and that was, I think, because they were afraid of losing more elections. They saw what happened when AIPAC mobilized its money. They were afraid of losing the support of the Christian right, which is extremely pro-Israel. And they were afraid of losing the money that people from the extreme right have. I think that also affects what mainstream media covers. And if mainstream media censors what they cover, if all of the stories come out about the hostages but nothing about the decimation of Palestine and the infrastructure and the murder and maiming, if that doesn't come out, then the people that we hope will mobilize to get the U.S. to stop funding that kind of terrorism, the war, the perpetration by Israel of terrorism, won't happen either. So money is such a critically important factor, I think. And as much as I admire the work that philanthropy does in funding Jewish organizations that are working for progressive causes, and will change because I didn't know about the Jewish Liberation Fund, and now I do, and I'll make sure that we help. But we are not necessarily the people with millions of dollars who can convince media to have a broader perspective, share a broader perspective. So how do we cope with that? Because when
the question is, how do we handle the fact that, as far as numbers go, both perhaps in terms of people, although I will invite my colleagues to argue, but certainly in as far as dollar amounts go, we have far less. How do we move through that situation?
We can't force the political parties to consider, to have a more open mind about the candidates they're willing to support.
Great. I'm gonna take your question from there, and see it, from this perspective of being in a position of having fewer resources. What's our move? Is it as, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Right. Is it as Fred maybe suggested, or I may be putting words in your mouth, about pushing political parties, or are there other ways? How can we be using our resources or building our resources in this moment effectively?
JLF is a C3 organization. Say that up front. There's a few threads in that question that I'm sitting with. I mean, one, I just want to appreciate the naming of Christian Zionism in this context, because right, there's a lot of discourse that talks about Israel and talks about Zionism or the Zionist lobby, as though that's just one thing, and as though like that gets conflated with Jews. And I will just remind all of us, and probably people in this room know, that there are more members of Christians United for Israel than there are Jews. Yes. So when we talk about, right, if we're going to be real about power, and we're going to be real about wealth inequity, we need to be talking also about Christian hegemony, right? Christian dominance, how that manifests in our political system. And I actually disagree that there are more of them than there are of us. They have just been better at manipulating systems of oppression to believe us, or to convince us that we have to fight against each other for scraps, right? But actually, the kind of solidarity model and vision that JFREJ and so many of JLF's, really all of JLF's grantees are putting forth into the world and are organizing around is one in which we are building solidarity across working people, across, right, the global majority, towards a future of equity and justice and shared safety and thriving, and a world in which there is enough for all of us. I have written down in a different notebook, and so I cannot tell you who said it, but at a recent conference, someone said, there's enough out there for all of us to have enough, but there is not enough for some of us to have all of it. That's the shift. Thank you. Yes.
Eva Morales.
Eva Morales. Right? That's the vision. And so that is an organizing challenge. And it's one that I think we can win if we can resource it sufficiently and stop fighting against each other and tearing each other down, and instead focus on what's our target.
I think we should take the next.
Yeah. There's a question right here in the center.
Hi, I'm Becca. Thank you all. I think there's been a lot of really important conversations around what is and has been destroyed during the panels today, and so I just really appreciate also conversation about what we're building and what we're creating, as well as what has been destroyed that we are also complicit in. I also just really love language that all three of you have used around experimentation and practice and embodiment and play. And I say play in like a very serious term, right? Like play is a very serious endeavor. But asking people to experiment and practice and play in something that they can't yet understand or fully wrap their arms around requires a lot of acceptance of uncertainty. Right? Like asking people to imagine things requires them stepping out from what they understand and what they know. And so my question for you all is, you described how this uncertainty feels institutionally within your organizations, but I'm curious on like a person-to-person level, when you're talking to organizers or people within your communities, how do you help, and I use this word as a div school student, like what does chaplaincy in this uncertainty look like? How do you practice that?
I love that, and I was with you because I was so with you until you said chaplaincy. I'm like, oh no, I don't know how to answer it in that way. I really appreciate it.
How do you hang in with the people as they're confronting everything that comes up in those moments of uncertainty about any number of things? How do you hang with your people? How do you take care of them?
It's at the core. I think it's at the core of any good organizing project is this question of how do you care for your people, right? And I think we know how to do it. We sometimes forget, and I think we lean into long histories of, on the serious stuff, the mutual aid piece, right? Just like genuinely being there for one another in these moments of crisis. And for JFREJ, we have tried to build the infrastructure to make connection possible. I think it's actually organizing humans to to escape their isolation into connection is a very logistically heavy process. It requires a lot of infrastructure just to bring people into relationship with each other. It shouldn't be that hard, but it actually is. And it is the task of organizing I mean, when you think about COVID, it's a tangent, but when you think about how COVID was the largest organizing project I think we have ever seen as a global community, right? What does it look like what does it look like that is very uncertain and very scary. Time to invite people into collective action. You do need to build those personal relationships in order to trust that when someone says, come with me, we're going to take one more step, we're going to take a risk together. We do it together, and we see each other, and we witness each other. And yes, we play together. We take play very seriously at JFREJ, and we know that art. This is actually a plug for art and culture. Art and culture are absolutely foundational. They are foundational to this time. It has been a very grim day. But if there's anything that is going to channel us moving forward, is going to be an embrace of what arts and culture can do to unleash a radical imagination, right? But also to remember whimsy and beauty, because we are seeing so much ugliness and cruelty. And we need to offset that very intentionally. There's an Onion headline that says, white woman embraces joy as an act of resistance while doing nothing else. I loved it because we do really believe in joy as an act of resistance while doing so much more. But it is, right? And so we do need to do that work, and I think that, for JFREJ, when I say the logistics of it has been that we have neighborhood-based, this is not rocket science, but we have neighborhood-based spaces where people can just get to know their neighbors and organize in collective action, and month to month find out what is the latest thing that we are trying to learn, hone, move on, take action, and make sure that, one of JFREJ's beloved organizers, Rachel McCullough, used to say, it's much easier to steer a moving ship than one that is sort of stuck, right? And I think there's a lot of stuckness right now. And so our job is to move people into collective action every chance you get. So it's just because then you have the experience, the transformational experience of having done something together that is so much more powerful than doing it alone. And so that is our job. We're gonna have to keep practicing that for a very long time, I think, but that's part of it.
My answer to this question is not, it may not feel like play, but there's a thread that feels really important to me that is about vulnerability. Facing uncertainty, it's really human to want certainty, right? To want to know there's a clear answer. And I think this is part of why we are seeing a rise in authoritarian and fascism, because it presents us with a wrong and false and facile but simple answer to a deeply complex set of questions and states of uncertainty that probably all of us are feeling. And for me, and I think that this is also reflected in some of JLF's culture, the through line of leaning into vulnerability has been really a big part of that secret sauce. Because through the intentional, just choosing, okay, I'm gonna be vulnerable and messy. Sometimes it's not always a choice, but sometimes it is. And I think there's a particular way in which it's a choice for those of us who are showing up from privileged identities, right? When we're organizing around or trying to move people around facets of our lived experience that are marginalized, we also probably aren't doing so from a place of majority numbers, which means we have to get buy-in from people who hold our oppressor identity. That necessitates vulnerability. The inverse is not true, right? Even just the telling of stories, right? Making clear the stakes of our lives is vulnerable. It's not a given that when I am in relationship with people from a position of solidarity or allyship that I have to be vulnerable to them, right? I can just show up and do what they tell me to do and try to get it right every time and not take a risk and still feel like I occupy the role of good white girl, right? Doing good white lady the right way. And for me, it has been imperative to lean into actually like being vulnerable and being messy and getting it wrong and saying things that I'm not sure everybody in the room is going to agree with out loud to people I deeply respect and care a lot what they think. And then finding out again and then again and again, oh, they didn't cast me aside. I didn't get thrown into the wilderness by myself. Even if they disagreed with me, that's what solidarity feels like. That's what it feels like to be accompanied through the uncertainty. I don't know what that future state is, but I start to know what it feels like because I've been in that experiment.
Yeah. I can add to that, but I know there's
I actually want to add just some things about chaplaincy, but maybe not even about chaplaincy. And Joe said one of them, which is lifted up one of them, which is making mistakes, which is just like thinking through how we communicate to people that they don't have to be perfect, that they don't have to know entire histories, that this is a place where they can ask questions, and helping to start building relationships of trust in small steps. Right? It's not, when Audrey is talking about, building relationships with people, it's not that you ask people to jump 100 feet ahead of where they are, right, in one time. It's in taking small steps. And thinking with people, the resource of time, thinking with individual people, what are the small steps that you can be taking in this moment? The other thing I'll say, and then we'll take another question, is that some of the language you used, Joe didn't highlight it, but I will, around experimentation and hypothesis and thinking about what comes with change, which is loss, is all language that Joe has borrowed, and also that I have borrowed as well, from frameworks of adaptive leadership, right? And so if you're looking for places to dig in, right, adaptive leadership is a place to go, is a place to go. Maybe not the place to go, maybe the place to go. I don't know. All right, let's take another question.
I kind of want to make a question and a comment, if I can. If you're looking for a place for a community that deals in vulnerability all the time, hang out with your disabled populations.
Yes.
Because we
Thank
have
you for
that
that.
shit down.
Yes.
So that leads me to my question. So I'm a disabled person. I have very little money and energy. What can I do?
Thank you for the tissues, first of all. I think part of our job is to make our movements as accessible as possible. And that access, people, there are many different vectors, I think. I think people have very different access needs, and we need to be listening to those needs and adapting accordingly. And I think, it's been something that at JFREJ we've been definitely also sort of being very, we're intentional about it, and it's always a work in progress. So I think that we need all of us, and that everyone has a role to play. 100% everyone has a role to play in the work that we have ahead of us. We literally, there's no time to waste, and there's no talent to waste. We all, and no heart space to waste. If you're in it, we're in it. We're in it together. That's just what it is. And so to me, it actually can be, as not everyone can and wants to participate in all the things. And I think that we need to make our movements as accessible as possible, also in all of the ways, right? I think there's real limitations that are, that have to do with, having families and, and having chronic illness and having disabilities and having different types of jobs that they're taking up all of their time, because we're living, again, under racial capitalism where we have to, work 1 million hours and multiple jobs. So I do think, I do think there's a lot that we can all do that is just about, being a person that is count me in, because that does matter. It does matter to say I am in this movement, and you can count on my name, on my participation as someone who is affirming I affirm that I am part of this, that I believe in what we are building. But I think that there's been a lot of work to make our spaces more more accessible in general, just in terms of like hybrid. COVID has taught us we have to do that anyway. We have to make, and we actually are all better when we do better. And so that has been an incredible thing to see how we've expanded our movements through incorporating disability justice lens. So it's not a specific answer, but I just think that there's, you know, people can do things from their home. People can do things, they can make phone calls, they could participate in all kinds of various, you know, all of our campaigns should have ways for people to participate, you know, whether remotely, whether in person, whether with small dollars, whether with large dollars. I think that we have to make room for all of that, and I think we.
I will say the disability community is talking about how come the keyword isn't being used.
So, which word?
Disability.
Oh, here, you mean?
In the larger world.
Yeah.
You're always the last considered and the first cut.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for making that visible here, right? Which is that folks with disabilities or creating access is often the last priority considered and often the first priority to go. And so I appreciate that and appreciate you for bringing it here. We've got time for one more question. And I'm gonna look right because everybody else has been looking left, even though it hurts me. Amelia, go ahead. You know, I looked right but chose a friend. I don't know. You can critique me later.
Sorry, I'm Amelia.
Oh, two Amelias.
Oh, there's two of us.
Oh.
Oh, Amelia.
Work it out over there.
There's not two Amelias. There was yesterday. You know what I'm going to ask about.
I don't, but please.
Yes, you do.
I know.
So in the last year, unfortunately, we lost the only organization that was dedicated to teens. That was a Jewish leftist organization, JICA, in the Bay. We have organizations like Worker Circle and other organizations around the country that do pockets of work on the left with Jewish teens. But there is no effort to incorporate teens and college students meaningfully into leftist organizing for Jews. There, again, are pockets, and we can argue about that later if you want to. And I think we're missing an opportunity. That's an understatement. Some of you have heard me rant about this before. I would love to hear both of you talk about how you're thinking both on the philanthropic and the organizing side. How are we bringing teens into this work? Because if we stop with 20s and 30s, we're actually really missing kind of the future, and we're going to be a little bit screwed in about 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
You're right. I did know what you were going to ask.
Yeah.
This is what happens when you get on stage surrounded by your friends. You each have about 90 seconds to 2 minutes.
Do you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, this is another place where I see the sort of mainstream and right Jewish philanthropic infrastructure and ecosystem is like way far ahead of us. We've got a lot of catch up to do in terms of engaging young people. I don't want to say like engaging as donors as though like, the way that the right packages it is not the one that would feel right for us, but engaging with young people as though where their dollars go matters, as though their vision of the world matters, and as though they are agents of enacting that in the world, just like the rest of us. I would be delighted to see that emerge within JLF's donor organizing ecosystem. We are currently a very small staff, and so I do not want to overcommit my colleagues to that project right now. And I do agree that it is integral. And since becoming a parent, I have felt so much more acutely the ways in which, right, access is also about access for the many myriad sets of needs that come into the room. I think about as a parent, all of the times I want to show up and I'm like, oh no, we don't have childcare, or like I can't bring my kid into that space. And how I long for my child to grow up in movement space, but like it often feels inaccessible because of the expectations of those spaces, because we haven't figured out how to talk about the issues in ways that allow us to bring young people in. And I think it starts even earlier than teens, right? To be creating a culture that doesn't just imagine children as like theoretical parts of our future movement, but in fact, like deeply integrates them into our spaces.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I mean, it's been a We know. We know people need it. It's definitely a need in our community and in our movement, and I would say it's been heartening. We have been experimenting at JFREJ with organizing parents, and mostly parents of young children. I think teens, like, we haven't quite figured out, although there's so much creativity in the membership that we actually have a teen who is self-organizing at JFREJ around, like, trying to make sure that we can, just is experimenting with this and trying to see what we could build. And I think one of the big opportunities there is just multi-generational, intergenerational organizing, as a general rule, allows for this mentorship opportunity. Like, nothing would be more powerful to me than the idea of our movement spaces being really embracing that intergenerational nature of our community and our movement and our history. We are always bringing in our elders at JFREJ. It's such a big part of how we think about our work. It's always about the people who came before us, and the work of actually then bringing in the people who are just starting to literally walk and waddle around. That is, we've experimented with taught Shabbat for ceasefire and others, which has been wonderful. And what we realize is, because we are a 35-year-old organization, we have these members who are now parents and who are saying, I don't want to stop being involved with JFREJ, but if I'm going to be involved with JFREJ, I'm going to need a space to bring my kid. What are you going to do about that? And so that challenge presents itself, and we have to keep iterating, and we have to keep exploring that. And I think it is an imperative in light of the grimness of the future we have heard about, and the power and the beauty of the future we want to build.
Maybe we'll just close by leaving you with two questions for you all to consider, which come from our colleague and teacher, Mario Lugay, who I don't remember what organization he's at right now.
Justice Funders.
Great, at Justice Funders, which is, who do you do this work in honor of, and who do you do this work in anticipation of? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.